Have you ever stopped to think about the journey of the phone in your hand or the coffee in your mug? In the quiet hours before dawn, a paradox lies sleeping. Our world is smaller than ever. Yet the true centers of power have never been more hidden. Picture a single container ship gliding through the Panama Canal. It's filled with goods assembled from 5 different continents, all heading to a city you might never visit. As that ship moves, it awakens a vast, invisible network of influence. This is the hidden story of how a handful of decisions, systems, and forces rewired our modern world. It's a story of history, economics, and power, global in its sweep, yet deeply personal in its consequences. Our journey begins in the 19th century. Steamships, railways, and telegraphs started shrinking the globe, kicking off what many call the first wave of globalization. Between 1870 and 1914, global trade soared. Industrial empires rose, connected by steel rails and copper wires, colonial pacts, and the revolutionary belief that the world could be integrated, managed, and predictable. But then, chaos. The First World War, suffocating protectionism, and the Great Depression shattered that dream. Trade collapsed, capital fled behind borders, and empires crumbled. Yet from those ashes, a new order was born. At the Bretton Woods Conference in 1944, delegates from 44 allied nations gathered to design a new global economic system. They created institutions like the International Monetary Fund, or IMF, and the World Bank. Their mission was to stabilize currencies, rebuild shattered economies, and prevent the disasters of the 1930s from ever happening again. This architecture created a world where money, trade, and power moved in increasingly complex loops. But its deeper significance, the hidden story of how these systems silently reshaped the world's economic map and redistributed power, often goes unnoticed. This is the story of the infrastructure of modern dominance. In the post-war era, this new system worked with remarkable stability. The U.S. dollar was the anchor currency, exchange rates were fixed, and global trade boomed under a managed liberal order. The Bretton Woods institutions oversaw an era of reconstruction and expansion. But this stability was fragile. By the early 1970s, the system cracked under the pressure of inflation and a changing world. The U.S. cut the dollar's final tie to gold, fixed rates collapsed, and a new era of floating currencies and financial liberalization began. The 1980s and 90s saw a wave of bold reforms sweep the globe. Capital markets opened up, trade barriers fell, and state-owned companies were privatized. As the cost of transport and communication plummeted, the world shrank even further. The share of trade in the global economy exploded, climbing from less than 10% in the early 19th century to over 50% today. But behind the headlines about trade and technology, a new web of influence was being woven. Financial capital surged from Wall Street to the Far East. Corporations grew into stateless giants, and emerging powers began to challenge the old order. The hidden systems of debt, currency, regulations, and supply chains became the new battlegrounds for power. Think about the shift. When a developing country opened its markets and welcomed foreign investment, it wasn't just getting access to capital. It was also signing up to a new set of rules often set by distant banks, credit trading agencies, and multilateral institutions that demanded specific economic policies. The IMF's role evolved from simply managing exchange rates to championing sound macroeconomic policies tied to global integration. These policies became powerful levers of influence. For many nations, the choice was no longer just about war or peace, but whether to participate in this new system, comply with its rules, or resist. So, what exactly changed? It boils down to 3 intertwined systems. First, trade and global value chains. With cheaper transport and communication, manufacturing fragmented across the globe, a product might use raw materials from one country, be assembled in another, and sold in a third. This created winners and losers, shifting power from the national to the transnational. Second, finance and capital mobility. When capital was freed from national borders, money could flow anywhere, chasing higher returns and influencing government policies. To attract this investment, nations competed by deregulating, lowering taxes, and adjusting labor cost. Because financial flows are so fast and volatile, the sovereignty that states once held began to erode. Institutions like the IMF and the World Bank became the referees, lenders, and negotiators in this new global game. And third, rules-making and institutions. When rules are set at the global level, they shape how nations behave for decades to come. These institutions don't just monitor, they define what's considered good economic policy, open trade, or financial transparency. Power quietly shifted from elected governments to technocrats, corporate boards, and treaty obligations. This trio, trade, finance, and rules, is the foundation of the hidden story of modern power. Nations that plugged into the system early gained huge advantages. Others who remained outside found themselves marginalized or indebted. This integration also created new vulnerabilities. The more connected we became, the more exposed we were to global shocks. The 2008 financial crisis was a brutal reminder of how crisis in one corner of the world could infect the entire globe in minutes. Today, in 2025, we're living in a moment of friction. Globalization seems to have peaked, and its future is uncertain. We may be entering a new era defined by weaker growth, high debt, and sharp geopolitical tensions. The hidden story is shifting again. New alliances like the BRICS are forming, supply chains are being redrawn for resilience, and national strategies are turning inward. Take semiconductors, for example. A chip factory might be built in one country, using raw materials from another, labor from a third, and finance from a fourth. When a disruption hits, who really holds the power? The system of power is diffuse yet connected, concentrated yet invisible. At the same time, emerging economies are challenging the old rule-making structures. For decades, the dominant institutions were led by the West. But as countries like China and India rise, this architecture is under immense pressure. The hidden story now includes battles over technology standards, digital currencies, and the very definition of free trade. What was once a quiet, technical exercise has become a geopolitical showdown. The human stakes are profound. Jobs, communities, and entire nations are buffeted by forces they can't easily control. That container ship, that floating currency, that trade dispute, they are all part of a system that rewards speed, connectivity, and capital, but punishes slowness, isolation, and debt. So, we come back to our paradox, a world that is deeply integrated, yet where power is more obscure than ever. The hidden story that changed our world isn't one of armies and battlefields, but of balance sheets, treaties, and shipping lanes. Power today is less about the visible throne and more about the unseen ledger, the invisible supply chain, and the silent governance of institutions. The most important question is no longer who rules, but who shapes the rules. When you see a container ship arrive at a port, a currency tumble, or a new regulation being debated, you are witnessing this hidden architecture at work. The age of national factories has given way to global systems of value, capital, and rules. To understand our world today, we have to understand this architecture. This hidden story is the one we must tell, because it is still writing our future. By recognizing it, we start to reclaim our agency and ask how we can shape the world, instead of just being shaped by it. Thanks for watching. If this story sparked your curiosity, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell to join us on our next exploration.